We wanted to kick off today the task force on collaboration. This is a listening session. Part of what we wanted to do was to actually get feedback, talk about what we've done. As you all know, I appointed the committee back in October when I became chair of APTA, and the whole purpose was for us to look at ways that we could better collaborate externally and internally. How do we work amongst our respective groups in terms of CEOs, transit board members, and business members internally, but how could we work better externally? And so today, we're gonna talk about what we've done to date, report out, and hopefully get a little bit more feedback. We have one more listening session, I believe, we're gonna do at the Rail Conference, and then we're gonna wrap all this up into a report. And so first and foremost, I wanna just acknowledge the co-chairs who said, yes, Valerie, we'll take this on, we'll do this, it's important. David Stackrow is chair of the Transit Board Members Committee. In August, recent CEO, GM, who said, hey, Valerie, I will step up and take this on, and Patrick Scully, chair of the BMBG. So honestly, I'm just sitting here. The task force, the people behind them have done all the work, and I'm gonna turn it over to them. So with that.
Thank you, Valerie. And good morning, everybody. And on behalf of myself, David, and Ann, welcome to our presentation and listening session. As Valerie said, I think one of her first missions and directions coming out of her chairmanship, if you will, and if, for those of you who are in San Francisco, heard her speech, it was all about collaboration. And the task force that was set up was immediately after that San Francisco meeting. And the three of us, or four of us here, plus a number of people in the audience, and you'll see the work groups that got set up have been extremely active in the last 9 months. And I would say, quite frankly, extremely effective. You'll see the results that came out of our work. But as a front-end, let's say, initiative, the approach was really to focus on how to open up communication, how to collaborate, discuss better amongst the constituent groups of APTA, and how to make APTA from great to greater. APTA does great things, and the work that we've done, we think, has opened up a number of areas and really assisted the association and the members to communicate and now work on a go-forward basis on a much more collaborative basis. So I'll go through the first few slides and then allow Ann and David to participate and present as well. And I'd say also on the three of us, with David as a transit board member and GM and myself representing the business members, we have worked extremely closely over the last number of months, which I would say from my experience at APTA, I think, you know, closeness to the GMs was one thing because that's who we tend to do business with. But on the board member side, that was a whole other sort of area. And now, quite frankly, it's not a whole other area, it's us. So those results are happening and very, very positive. So I think you can see on the screen, the mandate of the association, if we can go maybe back a slide. Thank you. Was to identify ways to enhance APTA. And Valerie mentioned there was two main focus areas. Internal collaboration among the constituent groups, you can see them listed, but also key external organizations that we'll go through. The main focus, a lot of our work was on the internal side, and the external work is happening as well, but the main initial focus was on the internal slide, or internal work. Next slide. So our timeline, it was launched by the chair in October. We identified 5 working groups. We'll go through those in a moment, plus a 6th that was focused externally. We did our final work and report just earlier this week or last Friday, the auspicious May 13th, which turned into a lucky day. But the way the report out was done by the work groups was either actions for staff to address or actions for the board to address from a policy perspective. Those were the main thrusts of the working group outputs. Next slide. So what were the the areas of key focus? First area is member alignment, to ensure that APTA members share and align on key priorities and initiatives. And that's a pretty broad statement, but the real focus was to make sure that, and we keep talking about constituent groups, are we all going in the same direction? There are some subtle differences, but at the end of the day, we've all got to be going in the same direction, and that's what number one work group is all about, and you'll hear the details in just a moment. Strategic plan alignment. APTA has a strategic plan and has been developed and has rolled out. I think we're into the first year of it. Interestingly, not everybody knew about the strategic plan. And there were some committees and work groups that maybe needed to understand what that strategic plan was and make sure their committees are working in concert with that strategic plan. So you'll hear that detail in just a moment. Staff support for member groups. A real key item, and I think we'll see a lot more of this as we go through the next number of months and years, is there are a ton of committees, there's a ton of actions, and there's only so much staff support. And one of the areas is how do we focus better and make sure that staff can provide the right support for those constituent groups and the work, or on the other side of it, make sure that we refine the work that has to be done and make sure staff is not overly taxed. So that was the third area of focus. The fourth is staff support for APTA leadership groups, specifically the executive committee and the board, to make sure those groups were properly supported in the same vein and way that work group 3 was organized. Number 5, APTA member services and association culture. How does APTA deliver member services, and the focus on what is the culture and the diverse needs of the membership, as I mentioned just a moment ago. So that was number 5 work group. And then external collaboration, you can see mentioned, shown on the screen, a few of the external groups that we did have an association with, but most importantly, how do we better strengthen those relationships and move forward on a much more collaborative basis with APTA and those groups. So we organized ourselves, APTA. Valerie was kind enough to, shall I say the word ask? I don't know what was ask. But it was a brief discussion between myself, Ann, and David, and you can see them listed here and their constituent groups, myself from the business member side, Ann from the bus CEOs, and then David from the transit board members. We also, next slide, we also had ex officio members, so we, obviously Valerie as chair, Dorn Barnes as vice chair, and Kim Green as secretary treasurer, all of which are the officers of APTA. Then from a listing perspective, and maybe Ann, I'll let you go through this, and David, the transit board members, so you can list them.
Okay. As far as the CEOs were concerned, we had Joseph Calabrese from Greater Cleveland Regional Transportation Authority. We had Donald Orso from Metro, Chicago. Keith Parker from MARTA in Atlanta. Carl Sedork from Monterey Salinas Transit. And we had Lauren Skyver from Sunline Transit Authority, agency, in Thousand Palms, California.
And on the transit board member side, we had Beverly Silas from Cap Metro in Austin, Texas, Jackie DuPont Walker from LA Metro, Carol Herrera from Foothill Transit, Tony Giancola from WMATA, Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority, and Fred Daniels from MARTA in Atlanta.
And then on the business member side, Jeff Wharton from Impulse NC, but also Jeff is the first vice chair of the Business Member Board of Governors. Hugh Harrison from Legacy Resource Group. Hugh is the second vice chair of the Business Member Board of Governors. Chuck Walkley from Transit Consult, and Paul Skatelis from WSP Parsons Brinkerhoff. All of the individuals that you just saw in the last 3 slides were very carefully chosen. I'll speak for the business member group. It's important that from a leadership perspective, myself as the current chair, Jeff coming up, Hugh coming up after that, that we had continuity in terms of the work. So Jeff and Hugh are right in the middle of it. We'll be able to continue the work because Jeff's term is 2 years and Hughes another 2 years after that, so we have 4 years of continuity. Chuck Walkley, who had a lot of history in terms of past work, being on the executive committee and past business member board of governors chair. And then Paul Skatellis, who comes from a very diverse background, not only being a former CEO, but also now part of a much bigger organization and consulting company, but also Paul, who has a very broad and long history with APTA. So we did a lot of work of selecting the individuals, both on the business member side, transit board members, and CEOs. Next slide. David, that's you.
So we're on to work group 1. As Patrick previously mentioned from an earlier slide, we broke out into 5 key work group areas. And we assigned one of the transit board members, one of the business members, and one of the CEOs, along with a staff support member, and one of the, either one of the co-chairs or one of the ex officio members to work in each of these work groups. So along each work group line, we had representation from each of the 3 key stakeholder areas, along with support from staff. And I just want to make a plug here for staff. This product that we've come to as a final report couldn't have been done without the hard work of staff. Jim LaRouche staffed one of the work groups, Petra Millette staffed a couple of the work groups, Dick White staffed a couple of the work groups, and Art Gazzetti worked with Valerie on work group 6, which is the external collaboration. And they did yeoman's work in order to get us to where we are. So it really was a great effort. We were not putting what we thought we needed to improve the organization onto staff. We worked directly with staff to make sure that what we were asking for, what we thought we needed, was aligned with what they had the ability to do, and we had their agreement with what we felt needed to be done to improve the association for the membership. So specifically on work group 1, work group 1's mandate was to find a mechanism by which APTA could achieve, APTA constituents groups could share and achieve alignment on key priorities and initiatives, including enhanced communications with each other and collaborative efforts among the work groups. And the staff actions that came out of work group 1 were to ensure the APTA website was effectively being used for committee activities. The website is a great resource for all of us. It's especially a great resource for committees. And one of the things that we've asked APTA staff to do is to do some retraining on the use of the online committee collaboration pages. Not all of the committees have a collaboration page, so we were looking to improve and enhance that area. And then staff is also developing a video on how to use the committee collaboration pages so that it's simple for a committee member to be able to go to their committee page and watch a quick video and know how to use the collaboration page so they can communicate within the committee with the committee members. The second staff action item was to identify mechanisms for the committees to share information between themselves on best practices. What we found, again, in the 3 areas of membership, board members, CEOs, and business members, we found that intentionally or otherwise, there seemed to be silos in place. And one of the things that we wanted to do was work across these groups in order to break down the silos. Well, the committees didn't really have silos, but we found that the committees really weren't talking to each other. And a lot of the committees are doing the same kind of work and tackling the same kinds of issues from a different angle. So we wanted to try to develop some ways that the committees could make sure that they were working with each other and that we all weren't reinventing the wheel, where there was the ability to work together in achieving a common goal that was going to help multiple committees. So we looked at committee mandates and priorities to make sure that they've been updated on the website. And then we wanted to continue to reinforce the purpose of quarterly reporting by the designated committee chairs to the APTA Executive Committee. The 27 designated committee chairs are supposed to report to the Executive Committee each quarter when the Executive Committee meets. The Executive Committee then picks something or some things that are relevant for a committee to be able to bring to the board. And that helps to keep the connection between the committees and the bigger board of APTA. The third item was to try to achieve some enhanced collaboration by committee chairs of the key constituent groups. opportunities for each of us to attend each other's conferences, to speak at each other's committee meetings. One of the challenges in this area is that sometimes the committee meetings are scheduled at the same time, which makes it a little bit challenging for Patrick to get to the TBM meeting when it's the same time as our meeting, but we're going to work on trying to eliminate some of those conflicts. Though we all know that the calendar and the planning is probably a task that nobody wants to take on. But we will work to try to make sure that there's an opportunity for the meetings at the major APTA conferences for allowing the chairs to work with each other and to attend each other's meetings. And then for policy action for board consideration, we want to ensure that APTA policies provide for APTA officers to be able to attend annual meetings of the key constituent groups. And the travel policy has been reviewed by the Finance Committee. It's been brought to the Executive Committee for their consideration. But we want to make sure that there are opportunities for the officers of APTA to attend the major committee meetings. So for all of them, Patrick would attend, or Kim Green, who's our Secretary-Treasurer, would normally attend the Business Members Conference, but might not necessarily attend the Transit Board Members Conference or the CEO's Conference. So we want to find opportunities to make sure that they can attend those conferences. Also to ensure the chairs of the key constituent groups meet at least once a year. Again, based on a calendar, trying to find time in the calendar, we're still trying to find a way to make that work. But we want to be able to establish relationships so that the chairs of the respective groups, the 5 CEO committees, the 1 Transit Board Member Committee, and the 1 BMBG Committee, that we know each other. Again, having opportunities to work together. And we want to include the vice chairs of those committees so that as succession occurs, the vice chair becomes the chair, they've already established relationships with who their peers would be in those other key constituent groups. And then finally, to provide a mechanism for the chairs of the committee chairs to attend each other's meetings. Again, I mentioned that earlier. We want to have an opportunity where Patrick can come and speak and a CEO can come and speak at the Transit Board Member Conference. Try to find some subject areas where we can, all 3, a board member, a CEO, and a business member, can speak on a topic to each of our respective groups in order to share different perspectives that might not otherwise come. Board members bring a different perspective. Most of us are employed by outside companies. Our life is not transit. Our volunteer life is transit. So we bring a different area of experience and background that we think could be helpful in sharing with CEOs and business members. Work Group 2, also me. Work Group 2 had as its mandate, just one second here.
I can read it for you, David, if you want.
Is it on the slide?
It is.
Ensure that all constituent groups are engaged with forwarding APTA's strategic plan as an essential component of their committee work plans. And again, as Patrick mentioned in the intro with Work Group 2, of the 27 designated committees when we polled them, there were 17 out of the 27 that had work plans. 10 of us didn't know we were supposed to have work plans or simply didn't have a work plan. Some of us weren't aware that we were supposed to be working toward incorporating the strategic plan of APTA into our work plans. So there was a little bit of a learning curve right out of the gate, but we did get aligned. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to provide a couple of options for work plans. We stole from BMBG. We took their work plan as one model that we would put out to the other committees. And the other model that we chose was the marketing committee's work plan. 2 different designs of work plans, but we felt that either one of those work plans chosen by a specific committee would be able to be a good fit for the committees to have a work plan. We're not mandating the committees have work plans, but we are encouraging that they do. Another staff action is the APTA committee governance. We want to have a checklist of some form for onboarding new committee chairs. Some of us, especially the transit board members, the turnover and the growth through the officer chairs can be pretty quick because there is turnover in our ranks. Board members don't get renewed in their term, they don't win a re-election, They get replaced by their new mayor. So for our group especially, but just to have this uniform across the board, we wanted to have some kind of a checklist for onboarding of committee chairs so that everybody was getting the same information about what they needed to know from a committee chair perspective. We also wanted to ensure that all committees had vice chairs. So we want to make sure that if there is some kind of an issue with the chair, where the chair leaves the organization or changes their employment status or whatever the case may be, that there is a succession person in place that can take on the role of the committee chair. So there's no hiccup there. And then finally, a review of the committee bylaws for each of the committees to make sure that those are updated and refreshed for what the current needs of the committee are. The third staff action is to essentially look at more opportunities for cross-pollination of the speakers and the topics between the key constituent groups. Again, I mentioned that it was a little bit of a crossover from work group 1, but we really think there's a good opportunity for each of our key constituent groups to learn from each other. One of the things that we do at the Transit Board Member Conference is that we have breakout lunches. We have a breakout lunch that breaks out our groups into system size. So we think that would be a great opportunity to have a board member be a moderator of that lunch breakout group as that currently happens, but possibly to bring in a transit board member and a transit CEO to help facilitate the discussion on a system size basis. That's just one example. So policy actions, there were 2 policy actions for board consideration. We want to ask the board to essentially ensure that the strategic plan is being used as a guide for committee work plans. We think that emphasis, that reinforcement needs to come from the board of directors to make sure that the committees are using the strategic plan as part of their committee work. The strategic plan would be a key element of board orientation and in the annual meeting of the designated committee chairs. So again, as new board members come on to the APTA board, an opportunity to orient the board members and make sure that the strategic plan is forefront in their mind as well. Second policy action is to include the APTA diversity policy in committee work. Again, the mandate was to include the strategic plan, but we felt that the diversity plan in APTA is such a prominent document, it's such an important document, and with everything going on right now, we felt the need to emphasize that in committee work as well. So we want to make sure that all committee chairs have reviewed the diversity plan, that they're working with their committees in reviewing that document, and where it's appropriate to provide feedback to the Diversity Council on ways that that diversity policy might be able to be improved.
Okay, my turn. Group 3, our mandate actually dealt with member groups, support for member groups. Our staff action basically was to revise and simplify the membership application for single individuals and professional single individual companies. Number A was to develop a new form for the application. What is happening now is that the application has been updated to include single individuals, just such as retirees, for instance. They might not be part of a company, but they still want to be a part of APTA. So we wanted to make sure that the application reflected that as well. So what happens now is that on the application, you will have an area for an individual member that they could join if they're not a part of a company or professional organization. The applications will be updated once we go out for a new printing, the hard copies, but it is online currently now. Next slide. Next staff action is to increase participation of small and rural agencies in APTA for their conferences as well as for membership. One of the things that we found out through our collaboration is that we have small urban and rural systems that are either were members or never members. And one of the things that we looked at was the fact that we wanted to know exactly how many members did APTA have by state. So we went through that process and we realized that California, of course, has the largest membership. And we also realized that APTA was growing, but it was growing in its business member group, but not by its transit system groups. And so we wanted to look at that as well. So we broke it down even further to the point where now we know not only by state how many members we have, but we also know by state how many members used to be members of APTA, how many members resigned from APTA, how many members were never members, I should say, how many agencies were never members of APTA. So it gives our membership committee the opportunity to go out there and start recruiting and find out, do some surveys as to why individual agencies were members of the organization and now they're not. So we wanted to look at everything in a holistic manner. And that's what you have on there. Examine use of technology for more member virtual participation at APTA meetings, because in some cases your rural and small urban systems might not be able to come to a conference, but in order for them to understand the value of APTA, they need to be able to at least see something. So we says, well, let's look at technology and see with all of the things that are happening today, maybe we can do some virtual conferences where they don't have to bear the expense of traveling to the conference, but they can still participate at a different rate. So those are the things that we're looking at as well. Next slide. We wanted to identify how to strengthen affiliations with CTAA, state transit associations, and there was already a memorandum of agreement between CTAA and APTA, but we wanted to strengthen that agreement and do some things a little bit differently. So one of the things we're looking at doing is doing monthly coordination calls between the CTAA and state transit associations. Do some lunch and learn, staff sessions, joint letters, events on Capitol Hill meetings with these other associations as well, because there's strength in numbers. And in order for us to be able to strengthen our point of view when it goes on the Hill, we want to be able to make sure that we include everyone. And so those are the type of things that we were looking at. Next slide. Policy action, establish and publish a clear APTA sponsorship and meeting participation guidelines. That became an issue in Texas, where you might have a local sponsor that wants to participate with APTA on the local level, but we didn't really have the guidelines in place to be able to do some of the things that really needed to be done. So we decided we need to put this stuff in writing. So we now have it in writing, and it's going to be moved forward for policy action. We want to attract more small and rural agencies to attend APTA conferences, like I spoke about earlier, and meetings. And this has been assigned to the Revenue Task Force because it's going to be a part of a financial concern. So we want to make sure that the Revenue Task Force review all of this, see what the impact is going to be, from a financial standpoint. Next slide. Another policy action that we've moved forward was to create a mentoring process for new board members. Oh.
Okay, you can keep going.
Yeah, you're doing good. Keep going.
I'll let Patrick go back to his slide.
I just want to add something to what Ann had said on the previous discussion, and our work as the group of 20 or whatever of us, and David did mention it wasn't on the slides, but we had excellent support from Dick White, APTA staff, Petra Millette, and Jim LaRouche. They weren't on the slides, but they should have been. But they're a key part of this too.
Right.
But one of the biggest things that really came out of the work, and I think it was part of Work Group 5, but also Work Group 3, was the erosion of operating members. And I really, hats off to Joe Calabrese, who brought it up. We did some analysis, and I forget what the data said exactly, but I mean, there's a very, very significant number of transit operating agencies that aren't part of APTA. And so, we sort of eyes wide open, but now it's created, and part of the activity, and you heard Ann mention the Revenue Task Force, is, how do we create value of APTA and what do members see as value? and making sure that equation is properly communicated, and we understand why people are not members of APTA. And so that's a big, big focus now, probably one of the biggest ones coming out of this work, that maybe we knew it, but now we know it even more significantly. So to move on to Group 4, staff support for APTA leadership groups. Remember, this is board and executive. I don't know what was occurring prior, although I was a board member starting in 2014, yeah. But Valerie started I think it was a half a day or almost all day session for new executive committee members back in October, because there's 106 board members. And, that turns over with some, relative frequency that, suddenly you're on the board and now what? So one of the things that was identified out of Work Group 4 for policy action was to create not only an onboarding process, but also a mentoring process for new board members. So to either align themselves with another board member, to educate and let them know how the process works, what to expect. Because one of the first things you have as a new board member, you go right into a retreat. And I remember my first retreat, and I was like, well, you're doing one of these things. So we want to get all ahead of that, get everybody prepared, so when they come into the retreat and be a board member or an executive committee member, you hit the ground running. The big thing we saw came, the number 2 item for policy review is, back up, by the way, for number 1, we've got a couple of proposals that we're looking at. A couple of the work groups had some concepts. We will look to be rolling this out as the new board sits in September. So this is going to be coming on with that, and maybe even before if we can get ahead of it. So number 2 item is to create a mechanism to deal with urgent and emerging issues. I think we saw some of this come out of the FAST Act activity out of the 4th quarter, but also you can even speak to this conference and the issue with HB2 here in the state of North Carolina and how we dealt with it. And so a mechanism to make sure that as stuff comes up, staff and association leadership can get together quickly, deal with it, and get ahead of it. So all of that is happening. Mechanisms have been put in place and will continue to be refined as we go forward. Next slide. Continuing along with policy, Work Group 4 did a survey of the board. And what came out of it was, first and foremost, a high level of satisfaction with staff responsiveness and knowledge, conference organization, committee support. As I mentioned at the outset, this was an approach to how do we go from great to greater. And by far and away, the board said, hey, APTA staff's doing a good job. What we could do is, hey, can we see a little bit more timely responses to issues? Also got into cost of meetings, and that goes to the value of the value of membership. And more communication. And really that goes to not on staff performance, but more on prioritization and the amount of work and committee work that has to be done. And I mentioned that at the outset, that has to be refined. And I think we will see that with the task force that's now been set up, the Bylaws Review Task Force, chaired by Nuria Fernandez, Chuck Walkley, and David. So we already have activity underway there. And then at the same time, in conjunction with that, dovetails right into part C, is what is the governance structure, align with strategic plan, and create a more adaptive legislative process. I think there's a number of things in play. How big is the board? What does the board do? What does the executive do? How many committees we have? I don't think that's going to get solved too quickly, but I think over the next 12 months, we'll see a lot of activity there, and it really goes back to the priorities of the association, how much staff can support, and really what we want to do as an association. I think we all agree we're a big tent, but maybe we need to make that tent a little more effective and smaller. So that work is underway already with a task force set up. So now to staff action, and this one gets a little prickly. We're going to now Work Group 5, which is member services and culture, and this is probably the more prickly of the work groups. You know, we get right down into some of the issues at the staff level. But I would say from all of the staff at APTA, they've taken this on, and first and foremost, a retraining has been occurring and will continue to occur for staff advisors for committees to make sure they're advising and working closely with the committee chairs on a go-forward basis. There already has been activity through the end of last year and the first quarter, and will continue on customer service training for all staff. A consultant has been brought in to work with staff. And again, it's not that anything was broken, it's just more of a reminder and a refresher, and I think staff has embraced that. New employee onboarding and orientation process for staff, obvious what that is. And then to make sure, and we even had it here as part of an ADA checklist for our meetings. You know, I was going to say, well, I'll just let them read it from the slide, but that's not always the case if we're vision impaired or others, that we need to be cognizant of that, and also accessibility issues and all the things we stand for. So that was a key item for staff, and obviously they've embraced that and moving forward. Next slide. So now to policy action. We'll see this moving forward, especially with the selection of a new president and CEO, of how his or her performance review will be conducted. There's a very good base. I think it now has to be further refined and added to. We've had the discussion about adding a 360-degree review process from internal and external stakeholders, and I think we'll see that as part of the process, which is all healthy, and I think many of us go through. You heard about number 2 item, gaining back lost members, and again, assigned to the Revenue Task Force. Why aren't they members? Why did they leave? What's the value? What do we have to improve on? And then you've seen, and I think everybody read the letter from New York, where they had issues about how large agencies were being attended to by the association. Well, there are equal sides of that on the small operators side and medium size. So we got to figure out how APTA, you know, is, I keep saying it, is trying to be everything to everybody. How do we refine that and make sure we serve all of our members well? And then also we talked about board onboarding and education, but also how we can make sure we offer best practices of board members and staff interaction. There's a way to do business there, and not everybody may be aware of it, or we need to make sure we're properly aligned, eyes wide open as new board members come in, new staff comes in, and we make sure we're moving forward appropriately. So all of these items are underway. Activity is underway. We should see these come to fruition in the next number of months, either with task forces or with policy and action by the board and staff.
So group number 6, which dealt with the external collaboration actions, and I know we talked about this, but Art Gazzetti, who is in our policy shop here at APTA, actually really helped to hone this. And it wasn't that we didn't have good relationships with external organizations. APTA has phenomenal partnerships. But what we wanted to do was to hone in on those that get down to what we all do, is whether we're transit board members or CEOs or business members in our respective backyards, and better align ourselves with the core group of constituencies. So National League of Cities, National Association of Regional Council Governors, which regional councils, which are the MPOs. And we all saw in MAP 21, where MAP 21 mandated that there's a better coordination between transit agencies and MPOs. But also, you know, U.S. Conference of Mayors. If you think about it, we either have elected officials sitting on our boards, they're appointed by elected officials to our boards, or they report back to an elected official. And so how do we make sure that we hone in on that constituency group, quite honestly, to ensure that there's that continuation and that coordination and collaboration at that level? And so a couple things we're doing: participation at the Republican and Democratic National Conventions. Not from a politic perspective, from a policy perspective. How do we ensure that as we transition leadership at the highest level of our nation, that they understand that public transportation is key? And so, ironically, the RNC is in the city of Cleveland, right? The DNC is in Philadelphia. So you have GCRTA and SEPTA on the ground floors planning what's happening at the RNCs. And so one of the things we're going to do is have a joint reception with APTA, Conference of Mayors, League of Cities, National Association of County Commissioners, and NARC to say, hey, we're here, public transportation is important, we want to be at the top of your agenda, whomever becomes the leader of the free world, regardless of what party you're in, at the end of the day, we're bipartisan. Our riders don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Green Party, Orange Party, Blue Party, Red Party. Our constituents care about, right, transportation. And so we want to make sure that we are actually in their faces and saying, hey, we're here. And so that's part of it. The other thing, too, is promoting a study mission to Cuba. When we started this, as most people know, APTA has a focus on our international relationships. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is, where's the next wave of stuff? So fast forward today, when we started talking about Cuba back in October, there's a lot that has happened. Even direct flights to Cuba, we didn't have that back in October. So how do we be on the ground floor? If you think about Cuba, and if you saw a picture of Cuba today, you look at the cars in Cuba, they're all antiques.
Classic.
They're classics, right? And they're 1950, 1920, 1930. But what does that tell us? That tells us they have phenomenal mechanics. If you think about it, you know, they have phenomenal mechanics. So to keep these type of vehicles on the street tells you something. What do we need? We need to promote that moving forward. And so there's some opportunities there, and that's one of the things we'll be doing. We looked at a time frame that would have been May, but for obvious reasons, we need to bump that a little bit, but we are still looking at that. And so it's really to say, how do we better align ourselves, not just internally, but externally? And Patrick, I know you, David, and Ann touched on this. I want to highlight, when we first did this, it seemed prickly, I'm going to use Patrick's words, at the beginning, but it's all making us a better APTA. And if you think about where we are today moving forward, this is good information that's been really pretty much pulled together, stepped on, researched, and tested as we move forward. And so, again, work group 6, while it's a small work group and it's really been, again, I got to get Art credit to really push this forward, it's an important group. And so that's what we're working on work group 6. I'm turning it back to you, Patrick.
So as we look to go forward, I think and Valerie just mentioned it, I mentioned the outset, as did David and Ann, I think we're all better for this work. I think we're a much tighter association with much better communication, with a much better understanding between the constituent groups. And as we look forward, obviously we're making presentations, and we've done it at the business members, the CEOs, the transit board members. We did it at the legislative conference. We're doing it today. We will do it at the rail conference, and then the final report to the board will occur at the board meeting at the rail conference in June, so approximately a month. We'll lay out an article in passenger transport, and then the final report on website and to APTA members. But the most important thing is, and Dorn Barnes, Vice Chair of APTA, will continue the work. A lot of this work will continue. There's 2 task forces, if not more, that will survive this. There's 3 work groups that will survive for the next at least 12 months. So I think we all knew going into it 9 months ago, we had a ton of work. We had all these diverse issues. We boiled them down, and the activity of the work and will continue. And I think we'll see the outputs of that in the coming months. So, you know, when I first talked to Valerie back, I don't know, just before she was chair, and she said, "This is my theme," and I go, "What the hell does that mean?"
He did.
A little bit more, but now I get it. So I think, as I said, we're much better for it, and certainly me personally from a collaborative perspective. So with that said, I'll turn it back to Ann and David, but also we want to get your questions and comments too. So.
And I just want to point out one thing too, and not to put Dick on the spot, but Dick has been with us since day one. And so as current acting president and CEO, he not only saw this, but said, okay, how do we make this, you know, and make it worthwhile? So Dick, I do want to point out that, and thank you for your leadership on this, along with the rest of the staff that we've already mentioned. But Dick was with us from day one, and jumping in there and saying, hey, do it this way, let's do this, how do we expand it? That's all important. This wasn't APTA's not working well particular task force. It was, how do we work even better? And so, Dick, I just want to point that out and say thank you for your leadership on that. I think we can take questions.
Questions from the massive group?
And
They were selling
thank
tickets.
You
They
for
were
being here
scalping.
this morning.
Yeah, they were scalping tickets out front. Yes, if you want to maybe use the microphone so everybody can hear. Just so you know, when you're up here, it's bright and you can almost see figures out there.
Almost.
Hi, I'm Liz Peak from Jacksonville, Florida, and thank you for your presentation and for taking us through the process of how your teams work together to develop this report. Would the report this process can serve as a best practices? I was taking all kinds of notes, going, this is what we need to do in our groups. Yeah. So is the report going to take us through this process as well and some of the key things that you said?
Short answer is yes, because I think that it's important to show, it was really like a retreat on steroids, right? You know, pushed out a little bit longer, but it was healthy because it gave us an opportunity. Quite honestly, I came up through the transit board members track, and how do we better work together? How can we better align ourselves, right? And so the point is, yes, we're looking at really taking this now and putting it into a report. And if you think about it, I think you said there are 3 task forces that grew out of this that are currently underway. There's a task force chaired by Barry Barker on member consensus. So now we talk collaboration. How do we get to consensus? There's a task force looking at the bylaws, you know, refreshing, reviewing. Are we as good as we need to be? Can we be better? And then there's a task force, and that's chaired by Nuria Fernandez, co-chaired by David Sacro and Chuck Walkie. And the other task force is looking at pretty much, it's a revenue task force, right? Are we giving you the best value for your money? What can we do better? You know, do we have enough meetings? Are they too many, too long, all that good stuff? So what we'd like to do is we're going to condense that into a report that can be handed out and shared with others. And you don't have to take notes. We'll give you all the information you need.
Did you also want to know of how the structure or how the mechanics of it were put together at the front end as well?
If you could, because I mean, it could really serve as a best practice.
Well, it was a masterful stroke of work.
It was, you know what, it was a genius.
But just to take you through it, I mean, quite frankly, the 4 of us and the 3 APTA staff advisors sat down and said, okay, what are the key things? And we wrote them down, and we came up with 6 areas. And then we said, okay, and these were pretty broad, right? But we wrote them down. We started with a small group, but we expanded it to the group that I just mentioned. And then we said, okay, how do we, what's the mechanics of this in terms of people? And you say, okay, well, we need from each constituent group. So then we identified them, and then we put them into a matrix and said, who's best in each one of these? And then what we did is we got that group together. Initially, we tried to do it in person, but at the conference in San Francisco, we got about a quarter of the group. Then we had a conference call. We said, okay, guys, here's the stuff. Went through it. Now go. Conference calls are in person, and we said we're going to meet in December, face to face. That was our first, report out.
All-day meeting.
And then we did the same work through the first quarter of 2016. More conference calls. We met again face to face in Washington, and then again conference calls to refine the work. And then final work, our final face-to-face meeting in just last Friday. So
last Friday.
Those are the mechanics of it. But we started with the 6 areas, 6 big work group.
But to her point, I think what's important is articulating that, right? It gets to the communication of that, how we went, what we did strategically to get there. And I think that's going to be something we have to spell out, right? A lot of work went into this, and we need to make sure that we share that. So,
And
yes.
one of the things, too, that we did, we looked at diversity within the groups. We looked at system size within the groups. And, of course, we were also made sure that we had a board member, a business member, and a CEO within the group. And then, of course, a staff member that facilitated along with us. So you got to have the inclusion, and you have to have the diversity of size.
And representation.
And representation.
Of our main constituency groups.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think there's still some of this, I mean, it all looks great on slides. And some of it we've worked through or started to work through already. Some of it is a work in progress. And one of the things that we ran into, and we will run into as an issue, we each have our own conferences. The transit board members have their own conference, and we like to be with transit board members because we can talk about topics that are affecting us in our systems. We talk about our CEOs.
In a good way.
In a good way.
Joe,
You know,
Joe Calabrese, you're the best.
We talk about troublesome board members and how to deal with difficult board members. But we want to also be able to include CEOs in part of those conferences and business members in part of those conferences. So we need to find a way to do that without the prime membership group that's having its own conference feeling like they can't speak openly as they normally would. We'll work through that. So one of the things with that is that it'll be the committee chair. I would be the committee chair as the representative from the board members that would possibly attend BMBG and would possibly attend the CEO's committee. But we're trying to make sure that the member is somebody that's higher enough in governance to understand what the issues are so that we don't cross lines. We don't want to make anybody feel uncomfortable in their own conference, in their own specific committee meeting.
And in some cases, a board member might not be there for the whole conference.
Correct.
They might be there for a specific
Sessions.
workshop or a session or something like that. And the same thing when the CEOs have their conferences, they don't necessarily want the board members there because we talk about board members too. So
do you?
It's all good though.
How great we are.
Oh, sure. And so those are the kind of things that you look at. And of course, with the business member being there too, you don't want to cross the ethical lines either.
Right.
So you want to be able to break things into perspective and ensure that you have the board member at a session that they can relate to the CEOs, and the business member at a session that they can relate to the CEOs as well.
And I will tell you, over the last couple of years, last few years, transit board members, right? We started doing sessions on the role of the transit board member. It's an unofficial thing, right? As a transit board member, it's not our job necessarily to be down into the weeds of the operational and organization of a transit agency. If we're that down into the weeds, quite honestly, then we've got another problem, right? And we shouldn't be there. What's our role? What's our role with procurement? How do we interact? And so this really was transit board members saying, let's make sure as the industry policy setters, let's make sure we understand our role, and then how do we build upon that? And so there was a lot of internal, if you look at all the different groups, we pretty much said, why aren't we working closer together? Why can't I talk to a business member? Why shouldn't we be on the same panel? And so that's the theme of what you'll be seeing moving forward. And I think that, quite honestly, this has been a great task force. Timing is everything, right? In the world of politics, it's all about timing, timing, timing. If you think about how this came about and where we are today and the work that was done, quite honestly, and I need to pause and say, of the co-chairs, they drove this. This was member-driven, APTA membership-driven. Staff jumped in and said, listen, we do this all day. Let us help you frame it. Let us help you break this down. Let us help you condense this and put this into a concise type of product that we can communicate broadly. But a lot of work went by the membership. And so, quite honestly, it was a great working relationship, I think, but it is helping us to move to the next level.
One of the other things I just wanted to point out is that even though there are 3 select groups within APTA, we realized that they were silos, but we also realized that those silos had similar situations and problems that came out through the surveys. It's like, okay, in the discussions, we talked about, well, we have this problem with the board members group, we have this problem with the business member group, and we have this problem with the CEOs. All of it was similar. So it says, we need to cross-pollinate because we have similar problems. And so the task force, really brought a lot of that out. And it was an awesome process.
And it highlighted other issues that led to additional task forces. So I know Dorian has a question.
More questions?
Or a comment. and just so you all know, Dorian is first and foremost awesome. And he's probably very unique as he's a transit CEO, but he's also a board member. So he's in this, what do you say, the hybrid approach?
Bipolar used to be tripolar, so.
And he is wearing his rainbow
Absolutely.
tie.
You've all got to come to the diversity session, which is next. So, not so much a question, but more of a comment. First of all, my thanks to this group and to everyone who participated in this process. It really has been a fabulous process, and it gives us tremendous clarity as we go forward in terms of the things we need to do, the things we need to work on, the opportunities that we have. Valerie, as you've indicated, there are 3 task forces that are in place, and they are taking the great work that's been done here, moving it forward. I got bad news for you. Their work isn't going to be done probably on your watch.
And that's okay.
Which is great, but what I will commit to very firmly and very enthusiastically is to continue to not only support, but embrace, encourage, really take this work to the next level through the task force that have been named. There are other items that come out of this great work, and I think it gives us an incredible roadmap going forward. So I'm looking forward to being able to continue the work that has started here and take it to that next chapter. So thank you all.
And thank you, Dawn, seriously, for your leadership, for being there and being a part of all of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes, Dick. Our esteemed President, CEO.
Well, I would just say I think it's always healthy for any organization to take a look at what it's doing. Here we have a situation where we have a volunteer association. All of you here, you volunteer your time to participate for the better good of advancing and being the leading force in public transportation. You have a professional staff. We're paid by your contributions, your dues, your attendance at meetings. So you support the professional staff who supports you, all for the common good. So it's always a healthy situation when we can step back and figure out how can we all collectively work better. I think this process wound up at that space, whether it's a tiny incremental advancement in a membership application form or a big thing on governance, or how can we all make sure that the staff are all properly aligned with the committee work and they're all equally equipped with training and manuals and resources to do that. So, you know, for those in the audience who may have kind of heard this, you know, collection of work groups and task forces and individual work plans, the takeaway here is that we're going to be in a better place for the work that was done. And I feel very confident that as a professional staff supporting volunteer members in an association on a go-forward basis, that this effort has sort of taken us and gives us a roadmap to take us to the next plateau, and further identifies other key issues that are still looming out there that this group could flag, but has to hand off to somebody else to sort of take it across the goal line. So that's the reference to the other groups that will continue this work. So you know, I think for all of you, I would just say that's the takeaway. At least that's the takeaway for me. And I appreciate the chairs getting us all focused on this. I think there was angst in the beginning as to what's the intent of this, what's the meaning of this, you know, are people not happy with the staff and everything else. In the end, you know, it was time well spent. It's a good roadmap forward, and you know, I think we should all be thankful for the work of the group. Thanks.
Thank you.
More questions? Comments, accolades, awards? Thank you.
Thank you.
With nothing else, shall we conclude? But I have one announcement, if I could.
We have a very important announcement.
You don't know what
Go
it
ahead.
is?
I do. Go ahead. I do know what it is. Go ahead.
I want to let everybody know that the APTA business members are sponsoring a smart bar, tech bar, in room, where is it? It is 214. And we all think we know how to use our phones and our tablets, but we have a number of students from North Carolina A&T State University.
Four
of them who are there to help you use your equipment better, all for no charge.
We have smart people to help us be smarter with our tech phones.
So I think we can all benefit from it. Go see them, room 214. So sorry for the public service announcement.
No, I knew you were going to do that. And that's important because as we talk about going from good to great, right? And we all talk about millennials and the future and people writing up. These are 4 young people who, through the business group, through Eve and others, said, hey, let's do this, let's bring them in. So please, if nothing else, go by and introduce yourselves because they're our future. So thank you. I think we're done.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for attending. We'll see you next number of sessions. Thank you.